I'd been coming to this little bookstore for months, partly out of habit, partly because it was the only place that let me linger without looking like I had nowhere else to be. That morning, the rain was relentless, turning the city streets into slick mirrors. Inside, the smell of old paper and warm coffee hit me the second I stepped through the door. She was there, of course, standing behind the counter, hair pulled back loosely, reading something on a tablet with her lips pressed together, just so. She looked untouchable, in a way that made me feel both invisible and exposed at the same time. I wasn't sure why I came here. I told myself it was to browse, to pick up something to read, but really, it was for the way she tilted her head when she finally noticed me. She gave me that slight, almost imperceptible smile that felt like a door half opened. It wasn't flirtation. Not exactly. But it was recognition, and recognition hit me like a subtle, unexpected jolt. "Morning," I said, fumbling with a paperback in my hands that I wasn't even interested in. "Morning," she replied, her voice low, calm, a little amused. She didn't look up from the tablet at first, then did, and our eyes met for longer than comfortable. My chest tightened. I tried to look casual, pretending to skim the cover while my mind spun in circles about her. Her confidence, the way she moved around the counter, the small crease near her eyes that appeared when she smiled. "You always come here this early?" she asked, not looking accusatory, just curious. I shrugged, hoping I didn't look like I was sweating. "I guess I like the quiet." Her lips curved faintly, a twitch that seemed to say more than her words. "The quiet likes you back," she said, and then she went back to her tablet as if she'd said nothing at all. I watched her, memorizing the way her fingers tapped the screen, the tilt of her shoulder as she leaned slightly, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, that I was watching. There was a moment, just after she handed me my receipt, that made me almost stumble over my words. I had this stupid urge to say something that would mean more than thanks, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded. And she paused, just for a heartbeat, holding my gaze, and then she smiled. Properly this time. Just a flicker, but enough to make me notice everything about her, like I'd been blind before. I left the store with the rain still hammering down outside, and for some reason, I kept seeing that half smile in my mind, like it had tattooed itself on my brain. Walking home, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about the way her hand lingered over the tablet, the way she tilted her head, the quiet amusement in her voice. It wasn't anything tangible. Not yet. But it was something that hummed under the surface, something I couldn't quite name, like electricity before lightning strikes. I remembered what she said once, months ago, half-jokingly. "Don't say I love you." And for some reason, even then, her words felt like a challenge. Not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted it to mean something. And I wanted to show her, in ways she might not even realize I was trying. I shook my head at the thought, almost laughing at myself. But I couldn't shake it, the lingering weight of a glance, the half-smile, the way she made the quiet feel like it was alive. And as I turned the corner into my street, I realized I was already counting the hours until the next time I'd see her again. I hadn't planned on seeing her again that day, but there she was, crouched behind a low shelf, struggling to lift a stack of books that were clearly heavier than she expected. "Need a hand?" I asked, stepping closer. She looked up, startled, then straightened abruptly, brushing invisible dust off her shirt. I've got it," she said, her tone clipped, but there was a flicker in her eyes that betrayed the lie. I didn't comment. I just knelt down beside her, lifting the top few volumes with a careful grip. We moved in silence, the kind that isn't empty but weighted, each of us measuring the other in subtle ways. I noticed the way her fingers curved around the edges of the books, nails short, practical, yet delicate. The faint tremor in her hands told me more than words could have. "You always do this?" I asked, keeping my voice light, almost casual. She gave a short, humorless laugh, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Do what?" "Work alone. Pretend you don't need help." She stiffened, then shrugged, but her shoulders sagged slightly as she set the stack on the counter. "It's easier." Easier. That one word hung in the air. It wasn't a complaint, but it wasn't nothing either. I wanted to reach out, to touch her arm, to let her know she didn't have to pretend around me, but I held back. She caught me staring, and for a moment, her expression faltered. Her mouth twitched like she was holding back a confession she wasn't ready to speak. She cleared her throat, forcing a smile, but it didn't hide the tiredness under her eyes, the faint shadow that made her look older than her confident posture suggested. "You make it look so easy," I said, nodding toward the counter, trying to draw her out without pushing too hard. She gave a soft laugh this time, quieter, almost like she was testing if it was safe to let me hear it. "Easy? Nothing about this is easy," she murmured, then shook her head as if brushing away the admission. I watched her brush a strand of hair from her face, careful, meticulous, a gesture that felt intimate because it was so unconscious. I caught myself imagining her hands, so skilled, so precise, doing something gentle, something meant just for someone else, and I felt a pull I wasn't ready to name. For a few seconds, we just stood there, books between us, silence stretching and pulling tight. I realized she wasn't guarding herself with words, not entirely. She was guarding herself with motion, with tiny acts that kept distance between us. And yet, there was a softness in the way she let me help, the slight pause before she said anything, the way her eyes lingered on me for a fraction too long. Then, as I handed her the last book, our fingers brushed, just lightly, almost accidentally, but enough to make the air between us hum. She didn't pull away immediately. She let it linger, the brief contact, and I swear I felt her inhale just a little sharper than normal. She looked down at the book in her hands, and then back at me, eyes flickering, unreadable. There was a moment, suspended and fragile, where it seemed like we were both aware of something unspoken, something we weren't supposed to name. And then she finally looked away, brushing a laugh past her lips that was soft and reluctant, like she was testing if the world would let her feel it. And I couldn't stop noticing it. Not her laugh, not the tired curve of her shoulders, not the way she let me linger just a second too long. I couldn't stop thinking about the quiet electricity between us, waiting, patient, forbidden. The rain had started again, steady this time, drumming against the tin roof of the repair shop. I was under the hood of an old car, greasy hands, eyes half on the engine, half on her as she leaned against the workbench across from me. She was frowning at a stack of invoices, pen tapping lightly against the paper. The quiet between us was thick, familiar, yet charged. "You missed a spot here," I said, nodding toward the paperwork. She glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. "You're just looking for mistakes now?" Her tone was teasing, but there was an edge of something else, vulnerability, maybe, masked by habitual wit. I shrugged, wiping my hands. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like seeing you frown." She blinked at me, a hesitation in the pause before her lips curved into the faintest smile. That split second made my chest tighten. I almost said something reckless, but a phone buzzed on the counter, and her expression changed instantly. She glanced down at the screen, thumb hovering, and I could see the shadow flicker across her eyes. An ex, a client, a friend, someone she couldn't ignore but didn't want here. "Excuse me," she muttered, stepping a little distance away. I could hear her voice lower, controlled, polite. I tried not to listen, but the barest edge of tension leaked through. When she hung up, she leaned back against the counter, exhaling slowly, shoulders stiff. I stayed where I was, pretending to check a hose, but I felt like a fool, acutely aware of the space between us. The air was humid with the storm outside, and every small sound, the rain, the engine, the rustle of papers, seemed magnified, like it was keeping score of what we weren't saying. "You okay?" I asked finally. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Fine. Just paperwork." The word was clipped, but I noticed the tremor in her hand as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. That small gesture, so ordinary, so human, made my chest ache with an emotion I couldn't name. I wanted to step closer, to reach for her hand, maybe even say what had been hovering in my throat for weeks. I wanted to tell her that I noticed everything. The way her laugh faltered when she tried to hide it, the tension in her shoulders when she thought no one was looking, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I just leaned over the engine, letting my shoulder brush hers by accident, almost deliberately. She didn't pull away immediately. She just stayed there, frozen for a second that felt like hours, eyes darting down, lips parted as if to say something she didn't. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing through the grimy windows, and for a moment, I thought maybe she would look up, maybe I would finally speak. I felt the pull of something raw, urgent, unsaid, but before either of us moved, the shop door creaked. A customer, or maybe just the world intruding, and she straightened, smooth and composed in an instant. The moment was gone. I kept my hands where they were, pretending to work, but I couldn't stop feeling the ghost of her presence, close enough to touch, close enough to change everything, and yet impossibly out of reach. The shop had emptied out for the night, leaving just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional drip from the ceiling. She was perched on a stool, legs crossed, arms folded loosely, staring at the stack of parts on the counter as if they held answers she didn't want. I leaned against the doorway, hands shoved in my pockets, pretending I had nowhere else to be. "I don't get it," she said finally, voice low, brittle, like a thread about to snap. I froze. Not because she spoke, but because she sounded unguarded. Raw, but not vulnerable in the way I expected. It was the kind of honesty that doesn't need permission. What do you mean?" I asked, careful not to overstep, careful not to let my pulse betray me. She tilted her head, eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite name. Anger, frustration, fear, maybe all three. "This. Us. I mean, what are we doing here?" Her words weren't directed at me as much as they were hanging in the air between us, heavy and sticky. I swallowed. I don't know," I admitted. It felt impossibly inadequate. She laughed softly, bitterly, almost like it hurt her to hear the sound. "Of course you don't. You're 24, you're supposed to not know, right?" But her voice caught, and she shook her head, exhaling like she was trying to release something trapped inside. I took a cautious step closer, but not too close. She didn't flinch, didn't invite me, didn't even acknowledge me. She just sat there, quiet, fragile in the way only someone who carries too much weight can be. I wanted to reach out, wanted to tell her she didn't have to carry it alone. But something about her stopped me, told me this wasn't a place for comfort yet. We were silent for a long time. Long enough for the hum of the lights to become unbearable. Long enough for the air to thicken with all the things we weren't saying. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the counter absent-mindedly, small movements that were loud in their subtlety. I noticed the tired set of her jaw, the way her eyes flicked to mine for just a second before darting away. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't think I've ever let anyone see me like this, and I don't know if I'm supposed to like it or hate it." The words sank into me, heavy and impossible. I wanted to respond, to soothe, to fix something, but I didn't. There was nothing to fix. Not yet. Her gaze lifted to mine, trembling just slightly, and for the first time, I saw the rawness beneath the poised, controlled surface she always wore. It was terrifying. It was luminous. It was unbearable. And then she said it, softly, barely audible. "I don't know how to stop feeling this, even when I try." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every heartbeat, every unspoken confession, every impossible thing that hovered between us. And in that silence, I realized we couldn't go back to pretending. Whatever this was, it was here, and it was real, and it was terrifying. I stayed still, letting the weight of her words settle, knowing that nothing I said could change the truth that now existed between us. I arrived at the bookstore later than usual that evening. The rain had finally eased into a soft drizzle, and the streetlights reflected in the wet pavement like fractured gold. She was behind the counter, cataloging new arrivals, fingers brushing over the spines with care, but her eyes were distant, somewhere else. "You're late," she said without looking up, voice neutral, but I caught the edge of something in her tone, hesitation, worry, or maybe anticipation. "Traffic," I muttered, though the truth was I had been walking slowly, wanting to watch her for a few more minutes before breaking the quiet spell. She finally looked up at me, eyes sharp yet soft, and I noticed the tiny crease near her temple, the shadow under her eyes. She had been up too long, thinking too hard. Something in her stance made me pause. "I found something today," she said suddenly, sliding a small envelope across the counter. I picked it up, puzzled. Her handwriting, neat, controlled, covered the front. "It's a letter?" I asked, sensing the weight before even opening it. She nodded, biting her lip, fingers tightening briefly around the counter. "It's from a long time ago. Someone I lost." I didn't press, just watched her, feeling the shift in the air. When she finally spoke, it was quieter, almost a confession to herself. "I never read it. Not until today." I flipped the envelope open, unfolding the yellowed paper carefully. Her eyes followed me, tracking every movement, as if seeing it myself might break something delicate. The words weren't mine to judge, but the tremor in her hands, the hesitation in her breath, told me enough. This was a wound that never fully healed. "I didn't even know I still carried it," she murmured, almost to herself, staring at a corner of the counter instead of me. I hesitated, then said something I wasn't sure she needed to hear, but it came out anyway. "You don't have to carry it alone." She looked up at me then, vulnerability breaking through her usual composed exterior, but it wasn't for comfort. It was for acknowledgement. Her lips pressed together, eyes glimmering. "You think I ever get over things like this?" "I don't know," I admitted, heart hammering. "But some things, they just wait for the right person to notice them." She blinked at me slowly, as if weighing whether to laugh, to cry, or to stay silent. I could feel her pulse in the air between us, in the way her shoulders softened just slightly, the way her hands lingered near mine on the counter. "I forgot what it was like to be reminded of someone," she said finally, voice soft, almost breaking. Not with anger, not with grief, but with longing. Her words struck me in a way that wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a subtle seismic shift, quiet and insistent. I realized then that everything we'd been skirting, the tension, the glances, the half-smiles, was about to be measured against something much deeper, a place she had kept hidden for years. And then she did something so small, so fragile, it almost didn't register. She rested her hand briefly on the envelope, fingertips brushing mine for a heartbeat before she withdrew. That simple gesture, that fleeting touch, felt like a declaration, an admission that this wasn't just the letter that mattered, but that she trusted me enough to let me witness it. I left the store that night with the letter's weight lingering in my pocket and her presence lingering in my mind, both quiet, insistent, impossible to shake. The workshop smelled of oil and rain-damp concrete, a combination that somehow felt comforting now. She was perched on the edge of a workbench, legs swinging lightly, eyes half closed, tracing a streak of sunlight that managed to slip through the grimy window. I stood nearby, hands in my pockets, pretending to check the tools, but really just watching her. We didn't speak for a long time, because we didn't have to. The quiet between us had grown full, layered, heavy with months of unspoken words, glances, hesitations, and tiny gestures that had carried the weight of something much larger. She shifted slightly, and our knees brushed. A small, accidental contact, but it sent a ripple through me, the kind that left my chest tight and my mind blank. I could feel her noticing it too, though she didn't comment. Instead, she let her hand linger near mine, almost brushing the back of it before pulling away just a fraction. She started, then stopped, shaking her head as if the words were too loud for the quiet room. I didn't prompt her. I knew what she wanted, what we both wanted, wasn't in words. It never had been. Instead, I leaned against the bench opposite her, close enough that our elbows brushed this time, sharing the same small space in a way that felt deliberate and inevitable. She let out a breath, one I hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I don't know how we got here," she said softly, voice low enough that I had to lean in slightly to catch it. "Me neither," I admitted. "But I think we both knew, long before we said anything." She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that didn't announce joy so much as relief. Her hand moved again, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, and I noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly. I wanted to reach out, but I waited. And she did too. Finally, as if the moment had its own gravity, our hands touched. Careful, slow, the backs of our fingers pressing together first, then holding. No flourish, no drama. Just acknowledgement. Just presence. Just the quiet confirmation that what had been building for months had found its space in the world without needing to be named. We sat together like that for a long while, hand in hand. The sounds of the city outside filtered through the thin walls. I could feel her breathing even out, steady and calm, and I felt the tension that had been taut between us for so long finally soften. I looked at her profile, the way the light caught the curve of her jaw, the soft line of her shoulders, and I realized that nothing about this felt forced. Nothing about this needed to be declared. It was just understood. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, almost as if speaking aloud might break the fragile perfection of silence. "Me too," I said, letting my thumb brush hers in a lazy, deliberate rhythm. And for the first time, we didn't have to say anything else. We were just there, together. No confessions, no grand gestures. Just the quiet certainty that some things are inevitable, and some connections are worth the wait. I still think about that rainy evening in the workshop, the way light had slipped through the grime on the windows, the quiet hum of the city outside, the faint scent of oil and paper mixing in the air. I remember the way we sat there, fingers brushing, not saying a word, and how everything we had been holding inside finally found its space between us. It changed something. For me, it wasn't just that I had found someone to care for. It was realizing that care didn't have to be loud or dramatic to be real. I learned to watch, to listen, to notice the little things, the way her lips twitched when she tried not to laugh, the way her hands moved when she was lost in thought, the small sighs she didn't think anyone would hear. All of it mattered. All of it became part of me. For her, I think it was about trust. Letting someone in, slowly, carefully, and discovering that vulnerability didn't have to be a weakness. She still carried her past with her, the letters, the quiet heartbreak, the shadow of old losses, but she carried it differently now. With me there, it felt lighter, less like a weight and more like a quiet rhythm that could coexist with laughter, small smiles, and moments like the one where our hands finally found each other. We learned, both of us, that love isn't always about declarations or fireworks. It's in shared silences, subtle touches, knowing glances, the way you can be completely yourself and still be seen. It's the slow, deliberate noticing of one another, the way you adjust when the other falters, the patience to let connection grow without forcing it. I remember walking her home that night, rain dripping from the eaves above, our hands intertwined. Not for show, not for anyone else to see, but because it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She didn't say, "I love you." I didn't either. We didn't have to. The understanding was already there, woven into every look, every pause, every unspoken promise we made in silence. And now, months later, I can still feel it. The quiet certainty, the gentle pull, the way proximity became trust, and trust became something that didn't need to be named to exist. She's still layered, still untouchable in that way that makes the world feel larger just for noticing her. And I'm still learning, still paying attention, still grateful that the smallest gestures, like a hand brushing against mine or a look held a second too long, can carry a lifetime of meaning. Somewhere in all of it, we learned that love doesn't have to shout to be heard. It can exist quietly, patiently, without demanding permission, and it can be enough. So if you've ever felt that pull, that hesitation, that slow burn connection that doesn't fit into neat boxes or timelines, I hope you'll remember this story. Pay attention. Let it linger. Let it matter. And maybe, just maybe, you'll notice the small moments that tell you everything without saying a word.